Chapter 6. The Vicious Circle of Immature Love. Greetings, my dearest friends. God bless this gathering. God bless all of you. I shall now discuss one of the vicious circles that is very common among human beings. To some degree, it operates in every human soul. Most of the time, it lives in the subconscious, although some part of the circle may be conscious. It is important in this work that you follow this circle until you uncover it in its entirety, for otherwise you cannot dissolve it. My words are not addressed so much to your conscious mind, to your intellect, but to the level of your feelings, where this vicious circle exists. Even if you are aware of some parts of this vicious circle, use these words to search for all the other parts you are still unaware of. Perhaps there are a few among you who are utterly unaware of any part of this circle. In that case, my words will guide you to make at least one part conscious. This will not be so difficult, because many of your symptoms will easily show you that, though unconscious, such a circle very much lives within you. Still, do not interpret these words to mean that you consciously think and react according to this vicious circle. Realize that it is hidden. It will be up to you to make this chain reaction conscious in your work on this path of self-finding and self-development. Becoming conscious of these hidden currents will give you freedom and victory. Most of my friends realize that an illogical way of thinking, feeling, and reacting exists in every personality, even though consciously you may know a better logic. Everything in the unconscious is primitive, ignorant, and very often illogical, although it does follow a certain limited logic of its own. The vicious circle that is my subject tonight begins in childhood, where all images are formed. The child is helpless. It needs to be taken care of. It cannot stand on its own 2 feet. It cannot make mature decisions. It cannot be free of weak and selfish motives. Hence, the child is incapable of unselfish love. The mature adult grows into such love provided the whole personality matures harmoniously, and provided that none of the childish reactions remain hidden in the unconscious. If they do, only part of the personality will grow, while another part, and a very important one at that, will remain immature. There are very few adults who are as mature emotionally as they are intellectually. The child wants exclusive love. The child comes in contact with more or less imperfect surroundings that bring its inner problems to the fore. The child, in its ignorance, craves an exclusive love that is not humanly possible. The love it wants is selfish. It does not want to share love with others, with brothers or sisters, or even with the other parent. The child is often unconsciously jealous of both parents. Yet, if the parents do not love each other, the child suffers even more. So the first conflict arises from 2 opposite desires. On the one hand, the child wants the love of each parent exclusively. On the other, it suffers if the parents do not love each other. Since the love capacity of any parent is imperfect, the child misunderstands that despite this imperfection, most parents are still fully capable of loving more than one person. The child feels excluded and rejected if the parent also loves others, however. In short, the exclusive love the child craves can never be gratified. Furthermore, whenever the child is prohibited from having its way, this is taken as an additional proof that the child is not sufficiently loved. This frustration causes the child to feel rejected, which in turn causes hatred, resentment, hostility, and aggression. This is the second part of the vicious cycle. The need for love that cannot be gratified causes hatred and hostility toward the very people one loves most. Generally speaking, this is the second conflict of the growing human being. If the child hated someone it did not love at the same time, if it loved in its own way and did not desire love in return, this conflict could not arise. The very fact that hatred exists for the very person one loves dearly creates an important conflict in the human psyche. It is self-evident that the child feels ashamed of these negative emotions, and therefore it puts this conflict into the subconscious where it festers. This hatred causes guilt, because the child is taught early that it is bad, wrong, and sinful to hate, particularly one's parents, whom one is supposed to love and honor. It is this guilt, living on and on in the subconscious, which in the adult personality causes all sorts of inner and outer conflicts. Moreover, people are unaware of the roots of these conflicts until they decide to find out what is hidden in their subconscious. Fear of punishment, fear of happiness. This guilt has a further and again inevitable reaction. Feeling guilty, the child's unconscious says, "I deserve to be punished." Thus, a fear of punishment arises in the soul, which again is almost always completely unconscious. However, the manifestations can be found in various symptoms, which, if followed through, can finally lead to the chain reactions I will describe next. With this fear of punishment, a further reaction sets in, that whenever you are happy and enjoy pleasure, in spite of this being a natural longing, you feel you do not deserve it. The guilt of hating those it loves most convinces the child that it is undeserving of anything good, joyful, or pleasurable. The child feels that if it were ever to become happy, the punishment, which seems inevitable, would be that much greater. Therefore, the child unconsciously avoids happiness, thinking to atone in this way, and thus to avoid even greater punishment. This avoidance creates situations and patterns that always seem to destroy everything most dearly wished for in life. It is this fear of happiness that leads a person to all sorts of unhealthy reactions, symptoms, endeavors, and manipulations of emotions, and even to actions which indirectly create patterns that appear as if they would happen involuntarily without the personality being responsible for them at all. Thus, a further conflict comes into existence. On the one hand, the personality is yearning for happiness and fulfillment. On the other, a fear of happiness prohibits the fulfillment. Although the desire for happiness can never be eradicated yet, due to this deeply hidden guilt feeling, the stronger one desires happiness, the guiltier one feels. Now, the fear of being punished and the fear of not deserving happiness creates a further and more complicated reaction. The unconscious mind thinks, "I am afraid to be punished by others, although I know I deserve it." It is much worse to be punished by others, for then I am really at the mercy of others, be it people, be it the fates, be it God, be it life itself. But perhaps if I punish myself, I could at least avoid the humiliation, the helplessness, and the degradation of being punished by forces outside myself. These basic conflicts of love and hatred, of guilt and fear of punishment exist in every human personality. The compulsive desire for self-punishment due to wrong and ignorant conclusions exists in every human being to some degree. Thus, the personality inflicts punishment on itself. This may happen in various ways, either by physical disease that the psyche produces, or by various mishaps, difficulties, failures, or conflicts in any area of life. In each case, the area affected depends on the personal image the child has formed and carried around during this lifetime, until it is found and eventually dissolved. Thus, if an image exists regarding profession and career, for instance, it will be fortified by the inherent desire for self-punishment. Difficulties in this respect will constantly arise in the person's life. Or if an image connected to love and marital life exists, the same pattern will hold true there. Hence, if and when you do not succeed in a conscious and legitimate desire, and looking at your life you find the pattern that the fulfillment of this conscious desire was constantly frustrated, as though you had nothing to do with it, as though an unkind fate had befallen you, you can be sure that not only does an image and a wrong conclusion exist within you, but that in addition the need for self-punishment is also present. A further chain reaction in this vicious circle is the personality's split in its desire currents. The original split between love and hate, which started the vicious circle, causes further splits, as you can see quite clearly by now. One of these conflicting feelings is the need for self-punishment, yet on the other hand, the desire not to be punished coexists with it. Thus, a hidden part of the psyche argues, perhaps I can get around it, perhaps I can atone in another way for my great guilt of hating. This imaginary atonement amounts to a kind of bargaining. One does so by setting such a high standard for oneself that it is impossible to live up to it in reality. The little inner voice argues, if I am so perfect, if I have no fault and no weaknesses, if I am the best in everything I undertake, then I can make good for my past hatred and resentment. And since this little voice was at one point regressed into the unconscious, it did not die. It is still alive in the present. Two consciences. You get over something only if you can air it out. That is why the same old hatred still lingers on in you. It is also why you constantly feel guilty. If it were really a matter of the past, you would not feel this acute guilt all the time, even though the guilt is not conscious. You think that by being so perfect you can avoid punishment. In this way, a second conscious is being created. In reality, only one conscious exists. It is the higher self, which is eternal and indestructible. It is each human being's divine spark. Do not confuse this conscious with the second conscious that has been artificially created out of compulsion to atone for supposed sin or even for a real failing. Neither imaginary sins nor real failings can be atoned for by this artificial and over-demanding conscious. In reality, no one needs to be punished. As you all know by now, the way to eliminate real failings is very different and much more constructive. If and when you finally differentiate between these two kinds of conscious, you will have taken a great step forward. The compulsive second conscious makes demands that are impossible to fulfill. What happens when you cannot attain these goals? Inevitably, the result must be a feeling of inadequacy and inferiority. Since you do not know that the standards of your compulsive conscious are irrational, unreal, and impossible to realize, and since you believe behind your wall of separation that others can succeed while you alone do not, you feel completely isolated and ashamed, with your guilty secret of not only hating, but also of being unable to be good and pure. The second conscience is motivated by weakness and fear. It is too proud to realize that you simply cannot be so perfect yet. It is also too proud to let you accept yourself as you are now. You must therefore feel inferior because you are not able to live up to these high standards. All inferiority feelings in human nature can be reduced to this common denominator. As long as this fact is not felt and experienced, you cannot shed inferiority feelings. You have to uncover this whole vicious circle and see its lack of reason. You have to live through the emotions that led you to create it. Only then will you dissolve the chain reaction point by point and create new concepts within your emotional self. Whatever realizations you use to explain your inferiority feelings, they are never the real cause. Others may indeed be more successful in one way or another, but this by itself could never make you feel inferior. Without your artificially high standards, you would not feel the need to be better than, or at least as good as others. In every realm of your life, you could accept this equanimity that others are better or do better in some areas of life, while you have advantages that others may lack. You would not have to be as intelligent, as successful, as beautiful as other people are. This never is the real reason for your feelings of inadequacy and inferiority. This truth is borne out by the fact that you see the most brilliant, most successful, most beautiful people often having worse inferiority feelings than others who are less brilliant, less successful, or less beautiful. Perpetuation of inadequacy and inferiority. This inadequacy and inferiority serve to further close this vicious circle. Again, your unconscious little voice argues, I have failed, I know I am inferior, but perhaps if I could just receive a little amount of love and respect and admiration from others, this would feel like the same gratification which I originally yearned for and which was withheld from me back then, thereby forcing me into the position of hating and creating this entire circle. Admiration and respect from others would also be the proof that I was justified, for it is possible to receive now what my parents have denied me. It will also show that I am not as worthless as I suspect when I fail to live up to the standards of my compulsive conscious. Naturally, these thoughts are never reasoned out consciously, yet this is the way emotions argue below the surface. So the circle closes where it started, and the need to be loved becomes much more compulsive than it originally was. All the various points of the chain reactions make the need much stronger. Besides, there always exists a suspicion that the hate was unjustified, which it was, but in a different sense. The personality feels in the unconscious that if such love does exist at all, then the child was right, and your parents, or whomever else it was who did not give it to you, were wrong. Thus, the craving for love becomes more and more strained and tense. Since this need can never be fulfilled, and the more this becomes apparent, the greater the guilt becomes. All ensuing points in the vicious circle become worse and worse as life goes on, always creating more problems and conflicts. Only when you desire love in a healthy and mature way, and only when you are willing to love to the same degree as you desire to be loved, will love be forthcoming. Remember that the personality in which this vicious circle is strong can never take that risk as long as it continues to desire immature, childish love. As long as it cannot risk anything for love, it does not know how to love maturely. The child is not supposed to take that risk, yet the adult is. The inner child has only the immature desire and craving for love, and wants to be loved and cherished, cared for and admired, even by people he or she has no intention to love in return. And with those people who may have the intention to love in return to some degree, the proportion between their willingness to give and their compulsive need to receive is very uneven. Because of this basic unfairness, such a scheme cannot work. For divine law is always just and fair. You never receive more than you invest. When you invest freely, you may not get the love back immediately from the same source you invested it in. Yet eventually it must flow back to you, this time in a benign circle. What you give out will flow back, provided you do not give in weakness with a motive of proving something. If the motives for the limited love you give are unconsciously based on this vicious circle, you can never receive love in return. The love you crave in the mistaken idea that this will set you right is not the answer. In other words, you look for a remedy that is no remedy for your sickness, so your hunger for love will remain, never to be stilled. It is like a bottomless well, thus the circle closes, dissolving the circle. It is your work on this path to find this circle within yourself, to experience it, particularly as to where, how, and in respect to whom it lives within you. All this has to become a personal experience before you can really dissolve it. If you let this circle be only an intellectual knowing, without emotionally reliving it, the knowledge will not help you. To repeat, if you cannot identify the various points of this vicious circle in your emotions, the experience of this chain reaction will just be another piece of theoretical knowledge you have absorbed, entirely separated from your emotions. Once you find this circle in your personal work, you can break it, but only after realizing where the wrong premises are. You will have to see that as a child you were justified in having certain feelings, attitudes, needs, and incapacities which are now obsolete. You also have to learn to be tolerant with your negative emotions, You have to understand them. You have to discover where you deviate in your emotional tendencies, requirements, and desires from your conscious knowledge. You may know perfectly well and even preach that you have to give love and not be so concerned with receiving. But all of you in your emotions still deviate from such intellectual knowledge. The discrepancy has to be made fully conscious before you can hope to break the cycle. Only after you have realized and fully absorbed all that, and after you have thought about the irrationality of certain hitherto hidden emotions, will they begin to change slowly, gradually. Do not expect them to change the very moment you understand their lack of reason. When you face these emotions, their ignorance, selfishness, and immaturity, without being ashamed, and apply your conscious knowledge to them, changing yourself whenever you fall back into the old bad emotional habits, your subconscious will gradually reveal more and more wrong conclusions. Each act of recognition will help you further to break your personal vicious circle. Thus, you will become free and independent. The human soul contains all the wisdom, all the truth it needs, but all these wrong conclusions cover it up. By making them conscious and then working them through point by point, you will finally reach the goal of unfolding your inner voice of wisdom that guides you according to the divine conscious, according to your personal plan. When the divine laws are violated in your inner and outer reactions, your divine conscious leads you inexorably in such a way as to restore order and balance in your life. Situations will occur that seem like punishment, while they are actually the remedy to set you on the right track. Wherever and whenever you deviate, the balance must be reestablished so that through your difficulties, you will finally get to the point where you change your inner direction. You will change not necessarily in your outer and conscious actions, but in your unconscious childish requirements and aims. So, my dear friends, work through this vicious circle and experience how it is active in your personal life. Are there any questions? Question: what happens to a child whose hatred and hostility breaks out in the open? Would such a child still have a guilt feeling? Answer: such outer manifestations often occur in children. Whenever a child has a so-called temper tantrum, these emotions do break out into the open, but invariably the child is scolded and learns how quote-unquote bad this is. That fortifies the need to keep the true meaning of such tantrums hidden. And even if hatred is at times entirely conscious, later it is often suppressed. Then the same tantrums may continue inwardly in the adult with no age limit and cease only when this vicious circle is made conscious. Some people may develop a sickness which will be a form of childish temper tantrum, or they may simply make life difficult for those around them. By their unhappiness, such people constantly inflict hardship on others with the aim of forcing their will and their compulsive childish need to receive the child's utopia of perfect love and care. This may happen to various degrees. Sometimes it is very obvious. At other times, it is much more subtle and hidden. What people say when they indulge in such behavior is, "I am unhappy, you see. You have to take care of me. You have to love me." That is a temper tantrum without the outer manifestation of the child. The mere fact that this hostility may at times break out in the open during childhood does not necessarily mean that it might not be suppressed later. Be blessed, every one of you, all my friends who read these words. Take these blessings with you. Let them strengthen your courage, your willpower on the path of self-finding. This is the only liberation possible. Liberation from your compulsive high standards, which make you feel guilty and undeserving of what God wants you to have. Happiness, light, love. Be in peace, my dear friends. Be in God.